When she was a teenager, my next guest gave her newborn daughter, who she had named Alexis, up for adoption. Over the years, she says she constantly thought about her baby girl. I wanted to find her to see how she was doing. After a lengthy search, Cathy Terkanian finally tracked down information about her daughter's life and whereabouts. But it wasn't at all what she had been hoping and dreaming about all these years. Cathy joins us now to share her story. Cathy, thank you. I know this is uncomfortable to discuss. How old were you when you gave your daughter up for adoption?
17.
17. And what were your hopes and dreams for your daughter at that young age?
Well, I had lived the life of a broken home, and all of the bad things that go with that. And I knew at that young age, I didn't want her to experience that. I had been convinced that the best thing for her was a stable, loving home, and adoption could provide that. Didn't want to do it, broke my heart for years, but I did it because I knew how hard it was to grow up otherwise.
And you purposely decided to wait until your daughter was in her teens before you tried to make contact with her. Why'd you make that decision?
Well, there were health issues in my family she needed to understand and know, and I felt like that would be a time that she could discuss it with her family and plan for the future.
Right. So it makes sense. Unfortunately, it was a closed adoption, so you hit a roadblock when you searched for her, and yet it took years and you couldn't get much information. But eventually, in 2010, I understand social services reached out to you. Can you describe what happened?
Well, I had my hopes high, as anyone would in my situation, and I thought I was going to meet her. And, I knew it was going to be difficult, and I was totally, at that point, prepared for rejection. But it was, I was going to give her the facts and let her know that I loved her and I'd always be here for her. Mm-hmm. But that's not what they contacted me about. They contacted me because they needed DNA to rule out a Jane Doe in Racine, Wisconsin, who they thought might be my daughter, who had gone missing 20 years prior.
Ooh.
So I went and gave the DNA. I was living in New England at the time, so I gave it here in New England, and it went over to Allegan, Michigan, where it kind of got lost in the sauce, and it took about 3 years for that Jane Doe to be ruled out. So for 3 years, I pretty much agonized about that. But in that time span, I also went to work.
Just so I'm clear, so they contact you to get DNA because there's a missing child they believe might be your lost daughter. That's right. It turns out not a child that's related to you.
Right.
So up next, Cathy's long search for the daughter she gave up for adoption doesn't end with the news that she was missing. What happened next is even more devastating. We've been talking with a mother who decided to search for the daughter she had given up for adoption, only to uncover that the girl had been missing for years. Through her own investigation, Cathy learned there was so much more to this story. Social services wouldn't give Cathy the name of her daughter's adoptive parents, or even the new name that her daughter had been given, but they did give her the state that she went missing from. It was Michigan. So right. Once you knew the state, what kind of research were you able to do?
Well, needless to say, I was in shock for at least the initial period of time. I contacted my husband, who was up in New England. I was in Florida at the time. He had our computer, so he got online, and we knew her birth date, and we knew the state she went missing from. And he found her in the Michigan State Police missing persons list. She was the first one on the list. And in that time, we contacted the Allegan County Police Department, and they filled me in about who her adoptive parents were, about what the situation had been in her case right before she went missing, and that set alarm bells off in my head.
What did they tell you exactly about the circumstances around her disappearance?
Well, they had told me that she had run away from home. And that in that, incident, she went to her friend's house from high school, and that her friend had taken her to school, and she told the principal that Dennis Bowman was molesting and beating on her, and that Brenda Bowman was beating on her too. So, needless to say, more alarm bells went off.
And who was Dennis Bowman?
I'm sorry?
And who was Dennis Bowman?
Dennis Bowman is her adopted male person. And Brenda Bowman is her adopted female person. I don't use father and mother with them anymore. So I realized that I was going to have to do some networking, and I was going to have to hit the floor running with social media and so forth to do it. So the first thing I did was, classmates came to mind, or came across my, I realized they were out there, and I set up a classmates account for her. And between that classmates account and the Find Andrea page that I set up on Facebook, people just started flowing in, telling me about her life with the Bowmans. And it was pretty terrible, really sad, scary stuff. And I was amazed how the school just basically handed her back over to those people. So Dennis Bowman was on parole for attempting to force a teenage girl into the woods by gunpoint. When he got out of prison, my daughter was 11 years old. Now, those kind of people just don't change their stripes. I learned something about Dennis Bowman that convinced me he was killing a teenage girl that disrespected him in high school over and over and over again. And my daughter, in his mind, was not a daughter, but a possession. And I think also he was having kind of an affair in his mind with her. And he became jealous about one of her little boyfriends. And that just set something in motion, a very devious part of him in motion that he just played it out. And I could see that once I investigated him enough. I mean, I found this out in 2010. By 2019, I was convinced that man had killed my daughter.
So Cathy started looking more closely at, again, officially, her daughter's adoptive father, Dennis Bowman. And just this past November of 2019, it was discovered that he was charged with raping and murdering a 25-year-old woman in 1980. He has since pleaded guilty and has received 2 life sentences for that crime. Now, Cathy, what went through your mind when you learned that he'd been convicted of a crime of that magnitude, and then you're also sharing that he had other crimes allegedly against young women from when he was younger, and yet your daughter was given to him and left with him after that knowledge?
I, basically wasn't surprised. Let's put it that way. I knew this man had done other things. He didn't just do his evil in Michigan. He did it in Virginia, too. So, I've been telling the police for years, he did something in Virginia because he spent 4 years there in the Navy. So when that broke, I guess what I was surprised is that somebody actually put that together, that there's some force for good and truth that just brought all that together. So while I was in shock that it actually happened, I wasn't surprised that he had done it.
He finally made an admission recently about your daughter. But what did he tell you?
He said he had come home, fought with Andrea. She fell down the stairs, broke her neck. He put her in a garbage can, and the garbage man took her off. That's what the detective told me when he called me.
Did you have any idea what had really happened to your daughter, where her body might have been?
Several different things brought me to the conclusion that since I believed he felt he owned her, that he did not just throw her body in the garbage, that he kept her. And I was convinced that his sociopathic mind had taken her and buried her in his backyard, where he could keep an eye on her and nobody else would find her.
So were you able to get images of his backyard, do any assessment from that regard?
Oh, indeed. For 10 years, I collected Google Map prints. The first print showed, I had learned that there was a trailer on the property out there and that he had not built a house until 1996. So when I saw the oval-shaped, what I was convinced was a above ground pool. I'd already had the property searched where she actually went and he claimed she ran away from. They never found anything. When I watched that backyard change over the decade I was involved in this, that area became more and more obscured until finally you couldn't see it at all. And now I had been very much out there calling him out and had even posted that she was buried in his backyard. Mm-hmm. Now that was in 2016. And sure enough.
What's stunning to me is that you did all the detective work, you literally handed it over, and it still took quite a long time. Tragically, it was February the 4th of this year that where police located the body of your daughter exactly where you said her body would have been located.
That's right.
What was that moment like for you?
You know, I felt that little girl leave me in a way that she's not gone completely, but I feel peaceful. And I cherish that. So now it's time to finish it.
And finish it for you means, again, by the way, I understand completely.
It's time for me to have that adoption annulled once he is convicted of her murder so that I can get her body back, change her name, and bury her properly. And change the law. So, you know, when this happens, and we're not living in a perfect world, people do bad things. The person that cared about that child that did what I did, and you don't have to do that much, but the person with that vested interest can annul that adoption and take that child back and give her the peace she deserves.
Well, Cathy, you did what mothers do. And I understand that you were in a difficult predicament as a teenager, and you did what you did because you loved your daughter and wanted her to have a better life than you were struggling with. And the fact that you've persisted all these years to make right what happened to her is testimony to that.
Well, I agree.
Well, I hope
I
you
agree.
do. I hope deep in your heart you understand that. Good luck to you, and I think you, knowing what you just told me, I think your persistence will pay off.
It sure will.
All right, we'll be right back.
It sure will.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss out on new videos to live the good life.